If you're a fan of Forza Horizon 5, if you play Forza Horizon 5, then you would know that the most recent update to the game, as of the recording of this video at least, was Apex All-Stars. Unless you've been living under a rock or something. This update added a whole bunch of modern GT racing cars, primarily GTE and GT3, which are similar but different versions of Grand Touring cars. These are the first proper modern race cars to come to Forza Horizon since Horizon 3 had its own selection of GTE, GT3 and even V8 supercars. Now that's not to say there weren't racing cars in Horizon 5 before this. I mean, there's been a selection of rally cars and even some old pre-war Grand Prix cars. But these are proper modern racing cars. They're not prototypes, they're not Formula 1, but they're still proper racing cars. And something they said in the Let's Go live stream when they were breaking down the update, they said that the new cars all have their own balance of performance that they have taken to get the cars to do similar lap times. That's what the balance of performance is meant to be, after all. Every GTE car added with Apex All-Stars has its own balance of performance. Every GT3 car has its own balance of performance, except for the ones that were added before Apex All-Stars. 3 other race cars had been added to Horizon 5 in previous months or years. 2 of those came from Spec Racing Series, the Huracan Super Trofeo and the 488 Challenge, can't remember what the proper name is, and also an older GT3 car in the form of the Mosler MT900 GT3. And I decided to take each one of these different cars and see just how well the balance of performance is handled. So since GTE has only fairly recently been rendered obsolete, I decided to start with those first. Each of the 5 GTE cars have been balanced to S2 class 910 Pi. GTE is a bit different from GT3. The cars have a base brake horsepower of 530, and each car is technically not really a road car. It's been purposely built to be a race car, whilst GT3 is more or less directly descended from the road cars. That's sort of the gist of how it is. The BMW M8 GTE is a fairly inoffensive car to drive. It handled very nicely, very nice to drive. And it was with this car that I discovered that the fastest you can tend to go in the GTE cars is around a 59 to 58 second lap around the Horizon Festival circuit here. Next up, the Ferrari 488 GTE with a number 62 Racing Competizione. Being mid-engined, it was a little bit more difficult to drive. As we can see, I achieved the fastest lap of this 5-lap session on lap 4, whereas with the BMW I achieved it on lap 2. Maybe that was just because I had some poor last laps with the BMW and some poor early laps with the Ferrari. Either way, the Ferrari was a little bit harder to get a handle of. That mid-engine layout sort of throwing me for a loop a couple of times. As I recall, it sent me sliding through some of these corners a bit more easily than the BMW. At least, as far as I remember. It was a little while ago when I recorded these. My best lap in the 488, ever so slightly slower than the BMW. Next car, the Ford GT-LM. This car is great. It's just a shame that the engine sound, it just doesn't feel right. It feels off somehow, like it's reverberating in some way. But that's that's more of a nitpick than anything. The car, once again, mid-engined, as I recall, a bit slidey around some of these corners, except when I managed to hook it up for one last go around the circuit. Managed to get the fastest lap on lap 5 of 5. Managed to go faster than both of the previous cars. This corner here has always been a little bit tricky, but I did manage to hook it up fairly nicely with all of the cars, except for the Porsche RSR. That one just didn't want to behave. Ford GT, though, was the first car I managed to get below the 59.1 mark, if only by the skin of my teeth. Next car is this thing, the Pontiac Fiero D1CK RGTP thingy-bajig. I'm not calling it by whatever name you people think it's called, because that's not what it is, very clearly. Does it sound like what you think it is? No. So, anyway, this thing, once again, mid-engined trash heap. The other ones were at least nice to drive. This one, god-awful. Hated every second of it, which is understandable. I mean, not a single person in the world likes this thing. Everyone who thinks they like it is kidding themselves. They're just in denial. And once again, managed to get the best lap on the final go-around, and even then, it was not a good lap because it ended up being the slowest of the GTE cars that I tested. Just slightly shy of a 59.4. And the final GTE car, the 911 RSR. This is the 2017 model, which is why the sound is different, because you can see the two exhaust pipes are on the far sides of the car rather than being in the middle. That's what gave the RSR in 2018 and 19 that's just iconic scream. Such a gorgeous sound, but in 2017 it did sound a bit different, and this sound is actually somewhat accurate. And this car, very tricky. As you can see, managed the best time on the last lap again, because laps 3 and 4 were ruined by slides. This is the only car here that's the only GTE car that is rear-engined, and it was quite tricky to get right. Did, however, manage to just pip the Ford GT to the post, if only by a few hundredths of a second. Next, we move to the GT3 cars, the first of which is a car that never actually saw action in WEC or IMSA. This is a car that saw only actually raced in the, I think it was the Pirelli World Challenge, the Cadillac ATS VR GT3. Was raced for about 2 years, I think, and that was it. Just got dumped and forgotten. Very hard to find any YouTube videos on this car either. The Pirelli World Challenge, apparently not very popular. And this car, quite the handful to drive. Once again, managing the best lap on the 5th lap of 5 that I gave myself. And you can see even getting a slide out of the corner there, even with my gentle application of the throttle. This car has a lot of power, 600 horsepower for a GT3, which is, I guess, helping to counteract the fact that it's probably quite heavy. GT3 cars meant to have a base horsepower of 520, this one has 600, but in the end that didn't help it, as it was the slowest of the GT3 cars I tested. Next up, the glorious sounding Lexus RCF GT3, the Vassar Sullivan number 14, currently still racing in IMSA with GTD class. It's funny how a Japanese V8 engine sounds so much better than the so-called American one in the back of the Pontiac Fiero. This car, a little bit nicer to drive than the ATS-V, but still having a few of those similar issues. Whenever I got to the power, it did have a little bit of a tendency to kick the rear out. This lap, though, reasonable. Didn't do it on the last lap this time, but it was, well, it was faster than the ATS-V, but not quite as quick as some of the other GT3s. It was around about this point, though, that I was realising that the GT3 cars were about 2 seconds slower than the GTE cars, as they have a PI rating of 890, which puts them just below the upper limit of S1 class. Next up, Mercedes-AMG GT3. This isn't actually the current version of the AMG GT3 that's racing in IMSA. That's the Evo 2 version or whatever. This is like the original GT3 version. I think this one's got a little bit balked on the rev limiter. For whatever reason, you're able to go above 7,000, but when you're in the cockpit, the rev limiter lights start flashing like shift now when you hit 7,000. So yeah, I think it's a little bit bugged. 7,000, 8,000, don't remember. But yeah, reasonably nice to drive, and it turned out that this car was the fastest of the GT3 cars that I tested. Going around the final corner, and we managed a final lap time of a 1 minute 1 second .440, the best time that I achieved, no matter how much that I actually preferred driving this, the 911 GT3R. This is before I put my Rexy camouflage on. Camouflage? Livery. I think this lap could have been a better had I not cut the first corner quite so much and gone onto the dirt. Might have gained a tenth or two. Heading towards the bridge section. Hitting the top of 5th gear, down 1 gear, down another gear, nicely through the bridge section. This car also rear-engined, because of course it's a Porsche 911, and it did tend to get a little bit rear-happy on some of these corners, hence why once again achieving the best lap time on the final lap. And despite my best attempts, despite everything, despite enjoying this car, I just wasn't quite able to beat the AMG. Only managing a 1 minute 1.595. So that's all the cars that were added with Apex All-Stars, including the ones that came from the car pack. Now we have the 3 cars that were added beforehand, and all of these are DLC. One of which comes from the car pass, one of which comes from another car pack, and the other one comes from the Hot Wheels expansion. And all 3 of these cars have their PI level around the same point as the GTE cars. So the GTE cars all have a PI of 910. This first car has a PI of 911. The Ferrari 488 competition, Corsa Cliente, whatever it is, the challenge. This comes from a spec racing series that uses nothing but Ferrari 488s. At least it used to. Don't think it does anymore. I think they've switched to Ferrari 296s now. And this car, a little bit worse to drive than even the 488 GTE. This one sliding around a bit, not going around the bridge section quite so easily. This one also has 1 more gear than the GTEs and the GT3s. This car is the only one that has 7 gears on this list, and so it messes up some of my little muscle memories that I built up over the recording sessions. Still, this one actually ended up being the slowest of the GTE style cars, going slower than even the Fiero. Next up, the Huracan Super Trofeo Evo. dressed up like another GTD Pro car. This car has a PI of S2906, so slightly below the GTE cars, which technically should make it slower. This car's been in the game for a little while now, and it sounds absolutely glorious with that V10 engine. Technically, the Super Trofeos are meant to be slower than the GTE cars, even the GT3 cars, and yet, here in Horizon 5, it's actually quite a bit faster than the GT3s, and is roughly on the same pace as the GTEs. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing got used in GTE-style races, as this car's time puts it solidly in the middle of the GTE pack. But this car breaks everything. Mosler MT900 GT3, which uses all the base GT3 statistics, so it has 520 brake horsepower. The only difference is that this is a GT3 from 2006, but it has PI of S2910, so it's on par in terms of PI level with the GTE cars, and yet either I just hooked up an amazing lap here, or it's just quite a bit faster than it's meant to be. This is meant to be a GT3 car, rather, and yet it's an absolute rocket ship, because this was the first and so far only car that I've managed to get below the 59 second mark into the 58s. Yeah, quite fast indeed. So there we go, there's all the cars ranked by their speeds. Hopefully you learned something. Maybe you've chosen which car you're going to drive, or maybe you're just going to ignore them all. Either way, thank you for watching, and I'll put all the laps in order right now.